What if a 10-year-old black boy stood before his class, proudly saying his father worked for NASA, only to be called a liar by his teacher in front of everyone? What happened next stunned the entire school and changed everything. Under a sky that felt too pale to belong to dreams, the Johnson family stood still, three figures against the whispering winds of Boulder, Colorado. The moving truck had long vanished down the street, leaving behind nothing but a cluster of flattened boxes, a dented mailbox with no name on it, and a 10-year-old boy clutching the edges of his hoodie like it was armor. Malik Johnson had seen skies like this before, but never one so quiet. It wasn't just the weather. It was the stillness of a place that didn't know who you were and didn't particularly care to ask. He didn't cry, not Malik, not even when they left Florida, not even when the rockets from Cape Canaveral became memories instead of noise in the sky. But he felt the ache now, like a pressure behind his eyes. This place didn't smell like salt or space fuel. It smelled like bleach, pavement, and something else, something hollow. The house behind them was beige. So beige, in fact, that it looked like it had been designed to vanish. The neighbors' homes were nearly identical. Each lawn was trimmed to within an inch of its life, each driveway freshly hosed. Somewhere down the block, wind chimes rang, out of sync with any breeze. Malik's mother, Danielle, glanced around with a practiced smile. "Well," she said, her voice wrapped in that determined lightness parents use when they're trying to protect something fragile, "this is a start." His father, Andre, dropped a box labeled Mission Files MJ onto the porch and sighed. "Welcome to altitude." Malik didn't speak. His eyes scanned the street, house after house, and the wide blue expanse above. In Florida, the sky always felt alive, loud, humid, thick with potential. Here, it looked indifferent, like it was watching but not interested. No one waved. No one walked by. Only a woman across the street wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a watering can paused long enough to see them. Just a second. Just enough. He hated that look. The one adults gave when they were calculating. Friendly on the outside, but already deciding which box you belonged in. Inside, the house was filled with the sterile glow of new beginnings. Fresh paint, gleaming counters, unscuffed floors. Malik's mother moved quickly, instructing where everything should go. His father, still in his navy blue Artemis hoodie, fumbled with cables, trying to hook up the Wi-Fi. It all looked perfect. And that was the problem. Nothing perfect felt like home. Malik climbed the stairs two at a time and found the room with the best view of the sky. It wasn't much, just a sliver between rooftops and the silhouette of a pine tree, but it was open air. He closed the door behind him and sat on the bare floor, pulling a well-worn notebook from his backpack. On the cover were three words in silver ink: Mission Journal, MJ01. He flipped it open to a blank page and wrote, "New coordinates, Boulder, CO, altitude, 5,430 feet, skies, unknown, no sign of intelligent life yet. Caution advised." The pencil trembled slightly in his hand. He put it down and lay back, staring at the ceiling. He imagined constellations up there. Orion, Cassiopeia, the kind his dad used to point out when they'd sit on the roof back in Cape Canaveral, his fingers drawing imaginary lines between stars, like blueprints for a future Malik could almost touch. He missed the sound of the ocean. He missed the Space Center's early morning launch alerts. Most of all, he missed the feeling that what they were doing, their life, their dreams, was part of something bigger than themselves. Here, everything felt smaller, quieter, measured. That night, he sat through dinner half silent. His mom asked him what he thought of the house, of the neighborhood. He said it was fine. His dad smiled and said, "Just wait until we see snow," like it was some reward. Malik nodded. But what he really wanted to ask was, "Do they have dreams here?" or just routines. He unpacked only one box before bed, the one labeled Mission Files. Inside were laminated posters of NASA missions, photographs from the Artemis Media Day, and a model of the Orion spacecraft that he'd built piece by piece with his dad. He placed the model on the windowsill. The stars outside were faint, struggling to be seen through city light and cloud. Still, he believed they were there. They always were. His father knocked gently on the doorframe. "You good?" Malik nodded. "Yeah." Andre looked at the model, then back at his son. "You know," he said, "this room's got a clean launch path." Malik smiled, just a little. "Not much of a view." "You don't need much," his dad said. "Just enough to remember where you're going." The next morning was Malik's first day at Roosevelt Elementary. It didn't take long for him to see the difference. The hallways were bright, lined with inspirational posters and framed student art that somehow all looked the same. The teachers wore cardigans and thin, practiced smiles. The kids stood in tight clusters. Eyes flicked to him as he passed. Principal Keating met him at the office. She greeted him with the phrase that would echo in his mind for weeks. "We're so excited to have you, Malik. We value diversity here." He wasn't sure if she said it to him or for herself. Ms. Hendricks, his new homeroom teacher, was the kind of woman who smiled without showing her teeth. Her bun was tight. Her glasses hung from a beaded chain. When she shook his hand, it was with the faint stiffness of someone used to being right. "This is Malik," she told the class, not unkindly, but without enthusiasm. "He just moved here from Florida. Let's give him a warm Roosevelt welcome." A few students looked up. One kid blinked. Another scratched his neck and looked away. The silence said more than words could. "Malik, you can take the seat next to Tyler." Tyler, a broad-shouldered boy with freckles and a football hoodie, gave a small nod and then turned back to his worksheet. He shifted slightly in his chair, not enough to be rude, but just enough to remind Malik he was new, temporary, an unknown variable. Throughout the morning, Malik kept his head down, listening, watching. The math problems were easy. He didn't speak, not yet. He knew the routine: new kid, new city, new rules. You stay quiet until you know what's safe. By lunchtime, the pattern was clear. Groups were formed. Tables were claimed. Malik walked the perimeter of the cafeteria like a rover scanning terrain. He sat alone, unwrapping his sandwich slowly, wondering what would happen if he pulled out his mission journal and started sketching. He didn't. No one approached him. No one laughed at him either. But sometimes, silence is louder than cruelty. It tells you you don't matter enough to be mocked. When he got home, his mom asked, "How was it?" He paused, then shrugged. "Fine." That night he stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to his ceiling. They reminded him of the real ones, of the ones he couldn't quite see anymore. He whispered into the dark, like a message in a bottle, "Still here." No one answered, but he didn't expect them to. 2 days later, Ms. Hendricks handed out flyers for something called Career Week. Each student would be presenting about a parent or guardian's job. Malik's heart jumped. Finally, a mission. That night, he tore through his files. He found the photo of his dad inside the gravity sim, arms spread like wings. He pulled the Artemis badge from the bottom of the box, smoothed it out. He practiced in the mirror, standing tall, saying the words with precision. "My dad is in the Artemis astronaut training program. He works with NASA. He's preparing for missions that will return humans to the moon." He said it again and again. He could already see their faces, surprised, maybe even impressed. He didn't know yet that some truths are too big for certain rooms, and some people have already decided what kind of future you're allowed to dream, not because of what you said, but because of who you are when you say it. Malik closed his mission folder, laid it carefully on his desk, and whispered to the stars one last time before sleep. "I'm ready." He believed it, and that was enough. Until it wasn't. The folder lay on Malik Johnson's desk like a heart that beat only for him. Inside, neatly arranged, were photographs, diagrams, charts, and something even more fragile. Hope Eubao. He had spent 4 nights working on it, staying up long past bedtime, memorizing every word he wanted to say, every fact he wanted to deliver with the clarity of someone who had not just read about space, but had lived within its gravity since he was 5 years old. Career Week at Roosevelt Elementary wasn't new to the fifth graders. Every year, they stood up and spoke about their parents, the dentist, the bus driver, the florist, the software developer. Safe professions, familiar ones. The kind you could explain in under 2 minutes without raising eyebrows. Malik knew his presentation was different. It wasn't just a job. It was a calling, a mission, a legacy. That morning, he woke up before the alarm, already dressed in his navy blue NASA polo before his mom had called him down for breakfast. He adjusted the collar 3 times, then checked the sleeve for lint. He had chosen this shirt carefully. It had the Artemis patch stitched above his heart. His father had given it to him during a media day visit to the training center. "You'll grow into it," he had said. Today felt like the day he might finally be tall enough to fill its shape. Downstairs, his parents were waiting with quiet smiles. His mother, Danielle, handed him his folder, already packed into his backpack. His father, Andre, raised an eyebrow as if inspecting a new astronaut pre-flight. "You ready, cadet?" he asked. Malik nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. "More than ready." The sky outside was a pale gray, sun struggling to cut through a gauze of clouds. The kind of sky that didn't quite know what it wanted to be. He walked to the bus stop without his hood up, standing tall even when he noticed 2 kids whispering near the curb. He didn't care. Today was not about them. When he stepped into room 5B, Malik felt it immediately. Something was different. The desks were arranged in a semicircle, a podium set at the front. A big sign hung above the whiteboard in multicolored letters. "Career Week. Our families. Our futures. Miss." Hendricks stood near the projector, clipboard in hand, her smile taut and clipped. She gave a brief rundown of the schedule, then looked down the list. "We'll begin with Emma, then Trevor, then Malik." Malik heard his name and gave a slight nod, more to himself than anyone else. Emma spoke about her mom's dental practice. Trevor beamed as he described how his mother sold houses so people could find their forever homes. The room responded to each with small nods and polite applause. Miss Hendricks offered commentary like, "That's important work," and "very professional." Then she said his name. "Malik?" He stood slowly, his hands suddenly too aware of themselves. He pulled out his folder, walked to the front of the room, and placed it carefully on the stand. The room was quiet, not expectant, not hostile, just waiting. He took a breath. "Hi, my name is Malik Johnson, and I'm here to talk about my dad's job. He works for NASA. He's an astronaut in training under the Artemis program. He's preparing for future missions that will return astronauts to the moon." It was the first time he had said it out loud in front of people who didn't already believe it. He flipped open the folder and held up a photograph. His father in a pressurized flight suit, standing beside a capsule mock-up, smiling beneath a helmet. He moved to the next photo. Andre Johnson floating mid-air in the zero-gravity simulator. Another, his ID badge, his access pass to the Johnson Space Center. His voice was steady, stronger than he thought it would be. He works on extended flight simulations, emergency recovery training, and lunar surface operations. His team includes engineers, scientists, and other astronaut candidates. He was selected last year and is currently completing Phase 2 of the training protocols. He paused. The silence wasn't like the silence in his bedroom when he sketched rockets by moonlight. This was heavier, too full, as if the room itself was holding its breath, but not for awe, for judgment. A small laugh broke the stillness. Malik turned his head. Liam, from the back row, was grinning. Yeah, right, Liam muttered, just loud enough for it to carry. A couple of kids snickered. Malik's eyes darted to Ms. Hendricks. She hadn't said anything yet. Her arms were crossed, her mouth pursed. She stepped forward slowly. Malik, she said, and there was something in her voice, smooth, almost gentle, but it tightened every muscle in his back. That's a very imaginative presentation. Malik blinked. It's not imagination, it's true. I have more pictures. I'm sure your father has a very interesting job, she continued, louder now, addressing the class. But let's remember, today is about being honest and respectful of each other's time. Liam coughed the word liar into his sleeve. A girl giggled. Malik's hand trembled. The photograph of his father hovered mid-air for a second longer, then he lowered it. His ears were hot. His chest was tight. I'm not lying, he said, quieter than before. He really— That's enough, Malik, Miss Hendricks interrupted. You may sit down. He stared at her. She didn't look angry. She looked sure, like she had decided something and no amount of evidence would make her look again. He closed the folder with numb fingers, returned to his desk, and sat down slowly, as if afraid the chair might disappear beneath him. The rest of the presentations blurred. He didn't hear them. The room was a fog of polite clapping and moving lips. His folder sat heavy in his lap, his father's smile folded beneath layers of silence. When the bell rang, he was the last to move. No one spoke to him, not even Naylor. On the bus ride home, Malik stared out the window at the gray sky, trying to find a star in the middle of the day. At dinner, his mother noticed it first. He picked at his food, didn't speak unless spoken to, and didn't even ask for second helpings of his favorite mac and cheese. How'd it go? She asked gently. It was fine, he lied. Andre narrowed his eyes. You gave your presentation? Yeah. They like it? Malik paused. His throat tightened. She said, I was lying. Danielle set her fork down. Who did? Ms. Hendricks. She said astronauts don't live in Colorado, that I was making it up. His father's jaw clenched. His mother's eyes narrowed. In front of the class? She asked. Malik nodded. She didn't even ask me. She just said it wasn't real. The silence that followed was sharper than anything said in that classroom. She erased him, Danielle said later that night, pacing the living room. She didn't just doubt him, Andre added. She told him who he could and couldn't be. I want a meeting, Danielle said. I'll request it tonight, Andre replied. Malik sat upstairs on his bed, staring at his closed folder. He hadn't even taken his shirt off yet. He felt like the badge on his chest was mocking him now, like a symbol no one believed in. He whispered, not to the stars this time, but to the silence. Why didn't she believe me? No one answered, but he wasn't expecting one anymore. That night, his parents sat in the dark, laptop glowing between them, drafting an email with the kind of precision used for emergency landings. It wasn't angry. It was clear, direct, measured, but every word carried the weight of a child's truth denied. The reply came quickly. A short note from Miss Hendricks. Thank you for reaching out. I'm happy to meet and clear up any misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. The word rang in Andre's chest like static. There had been no misunderstanding. His son had stood before a room full of strangers and offered them truth, and they had laughed. Malik didn't sleep much that night. He stared out of the window, looking for a moon that wouldn't rise. But he made a promise to himself. He would speak again, even if the room was too small, even if they refused to listen, because silence didn't protect you. It only preserved their comfort. The conference room smelled like floor wax and recycled air. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile white glow across the child-sized chairs that lined the edge of the table. Andre and Danielle Johnson sat in silence, waiting. The folder Andre held rested on his lap, his thumb brushing over the corner of the NASA insignia again and again like a nervous habit. Danielle's posture was perfect, back straight, legs crossed, eyes forward. But her jaw clenched slightly every few seconds, a barely restrained pulse of fury beneath her composed surface. They had arrived early, as planned. There would be no rushing, no catching breath. They would enter this meeting with clarity, with control, with every ounce of evidence in hand. Their son had been called a liar in front of his class, not for misbehaving, not for boasting, for speaking the truth about his father, Ms. Hendricks entered 2 minutes late, holding a manila folder and smiling that same placid, professional smile she had worn the first day Malik entered her classroom. She looked surprised to see both parents present, but if it rattled her, she didn't show it. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," she said, voice bright and distant. "Thanks for coming in. I'm glad we could connect. Hopefully we can clear up any misunderstandings." That word again. Misunderstandings. As though what had happened was a paperwork error. As if Malik's dignity had been misplaced like a permission slip. Andre's voice was calm when he spoke, but underneath it ran a current of tightly held restraint. "Our son came home humiliated." Ms. Hendricks tilted her head slightly, still performing concern. "I understand there was some confusion during career week." "No," Danielle cut in, her voice low and sharp. "Not confusion. He presented facts about his father's job, and you told him, publicly, that he was lying." Ms. Hendricks hesitated, her smile thinning at the edges. "Sometimes children embellish, especially when they're adjusting to a new environment. I've had students say their parents are superheroes or secret agents." Andre reached for the folder. He opened it slowly, deliberately. He laid out the contents on the table one by one. The official Artemis program letterhead confirming his candidacy. The photograph of him floating inside the zero-gravity training aircraft. His laminated ID badge. The group photo with the NASA insignia in the background. The signed verification from the director of astronaut training. "My son didn't embellish," he said, evenly. "He told the truth." Ms. Hendricks glanced at the documents. Her eyes lingered a moment longer on the photo of Andre in the training suit. For a beat, her face went blank. Then she adjusted her sweater, sat up straighter, and said, "I wasn't aware NASA had facilities in Colorado." "You weren't aware," Danielle said. "But instead of asking, you decided what was believable and what wasn't." There was a moment of silence that hung so thick it seemed to muffle the hum of the fluorescent lights. Andre leaned forward, folding his hands. "You told a room of children that my son lied, that a black child from Florida couldn't possibly be telling the truth about something as extraordinary as space. And the second you did, you gave them permission to mock him." "I didn't mean to." "But you did," Danielle interrupted. "You meant to maintain order, to preserve your comfort. You didn't think, for a moment, that he might be right." Ms. Hendricks' voice dropped. "I see now that I made a serious misjudgment. I I do apologize." Andre nodded. "But that apology isn't ours to accept." She looked at him, confused. "You owe that apology to Malik," Danielle said. "In the same way you dismissed him, in front of the class." Ms. Hendricks shifted in her seat. "Of course I can speak with him privately." "No," Andre said. "Public harm needs public correction." For a long second, no one spoke. Then, finally, Miss Hendricks nodded. "You're right. I understand." Danielle wasn't finished. "And we'd like to propose something else, not just an apology, a teaching moment. Invite Andre to give a real presentation. Let the kids hear the truth from someone who's lived it." Miss Hendricks looked at Andre again. this time with something more honest behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Humility. Yes, that would be appropriate. They left the school not with triumph, but with the quiet weight of reclamation. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering brittle leaves across the sidewalk. Andre exhaled slowly, glancing up at the gray Colorado sky. Danielle reached for his hand. "He'll know," she said. "He'll know we showed up." Malik was waiting at home, sitting cross-legged on the floor of his room, his mission folder still near his feet. He looked up when they walked in but didn't say anything. Andre knelt beside him. "We met with your teacher." Malik's eyes flickered. "Did she believe you?" "She didn't have a choice," Danielle said. Andre smiled. "I showed her everything, the photos, the letter, the badge. She knows now." Malik's shoulders lowered just a bit. "Is she mad?" "No," Andre said. "She's going to apologize. In front of the class. Just like she said what she said." Malik nodded, slowly. "Okay." "She also invited me to come talk about my work," Andre added. "Show them what space training looks like, what real preparation is." Malik's eyes widened slightly. "Like a presentation?" "A full one," Danielle said, "with models, videos. You'll help." A flicker of light returned to Malik's face. Not joy, not yet, but something beginning to unfreeze. 2 mornings later, Ms. Hendricks stood in front of the class as the students settled into their seats, restless with the hum of routine. "Before we begin our lessons today," she said, "I need to speak with you about something important." Malik sat still, hands flat on his desk. His folder was tucked beneath it, but his mind was already tracing the photos inside. "Last week, I made a mistake," Ms. Hendricks continued. "When Malik gave his presentation about his father's work, I questioned the truth of it. I didn't do that out of cruelty, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that I was wrong. I assumed something based on what I thought was believable. I dismissed Malik's words without asking questions. That was not only unfair, it was disrespectful. I apologize, not just to him, but to all of you." The class was silent, then she turned to Malik. "I'm sorry, Malik, you deserve to be believed." Malik didn't respond right away. His throat was tight, but he nodded once, slow and deliberate. That Friday, Andre Johnson stood at the front of the classroom with a large display monitor, a 3D model of the Artemis spacecraft, and a patch from his flight suit pinned to his jacket. He didn't begin with technical jargon. He began with a story of growing up in Baltimore, watching shuttle launches on a borrowed TV, sketching rocket ships in the margins of his notebooks. He talked about how hard it was to be taken seriously, how often he'd heard that someone like him didn't belong in space. And then he talked about what it felt like the first time he floated in zero gravity, the silence, the weightlessness, the realization that the impossible was just something you hadn't done yet. The students were transfixed. Hands shot up. "How do you eat in space? Do you sleep standing up? What if you sneeze in your helmet?" And when Malik stood next to his dad to explain the orbital trajectory of Artemis using the diagram he had memorized weeks before, no one laughed. Not one. After the bell rang, Liam approached Malik at his desk. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "That was cool." Malik didn't reply, but he didn't turn away either. That night, he opened his mission journal again. He turned to a fresh page and wrote, "Today, the silence broke. Not because someone finally listened, but because we never stopped speaking." He didn't need the stars to answer him. This time, he knew they were listening. The days after Malik's father spoke in room 5B moved quietly, but something beneath the stillness had changed. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of change that people pointed at in awe. It was more like a subtle shift in gravity, unseen, yet undeniable. Malik could feel it every time someone looked at him a second longer than usual, not with suspicion this time, but with something else. maybe curiosity, maybe recognition. The apology, Ms. Hendricks had delivered, though brief, had echoed far beyond its words. The class wasn't the same afterward. Malik wasn't the same. The boy who had been laughed at for telling the truth now found the edges of his world softening. No one clapped him on the back or threw words like sorry around, but the tension around him slowly loosened its grip. He was no longer a rumor, he was real. A week after the presentation, Ms. Hendricks pulled Malik aside after class. She stood by her desk, organizing a stack of math manipulatives, her face calm but unusually thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she said, "about everything that happened and what might come next." Malik waited, unsure of where she was going. "I spoke with the principal. We'd like to start an after-school science club," she continued. "Something different. Less lecture, more exploration. I'd like you to help lead it." Malik blinked. "Me? Yes," she said. "You have vision, passion, and your voice matters here. It always did. I just didn't see it soon enough." She didn't say this was redemption. She didn't call it a second chance. But Malik understood the weight of the invitation. It wasn't a favor, it was a door. That night at home, he told his parents about the idea. His mother stopped stirring the pot of spaghetti sauce to listen more closely, and his father lowered his newspaper, smiling in that quiet, thoughtful way he always did when something important was unfolding. "You going to do it?" Andre asked. "I think so," Malik said, "but I don't want it to be just about me. I want other kids to lead too. I want them to feel what I felt when you came in, like they belong up there too." Danielle walked over and kissed the top of his head. "Then you're not just starting a club, sweetheart. You're starting a movement." The next morning, Malik and Miss Hendricks drafted a flyer together. They named the group the Cosmic Explorers Club. Malik came up with the tagline, "Reach beyond what you know." It was printed in bold across the top, above a sketched rocket that he had drawn the night before. The first meeting was modest. 6 students, including Eva, who had asked him to sketch her a spaceship during art class, and Matthew, a quiet boy with a shy grin and a backpack always overflowing with books. Surprisingly, Liam showed up too, hovering near the doorway like someone afraid of being told to leave. Malik nodded to him. "We're building models today. Want to help?" Liam shrugged. "I guess." By the end of the meeting, he was laughing with the others as they figured out whether Pluto should be a marble or a peppercorn in their scale model solar system. No one mentioned what had happened weeks before, but sometimes progress doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up and gets to work. The club grew. Word spread. The art teacher donated posters of nebulae and galaxies. The school librarian unearthed dusty astronomy books and cleared a shelf just for them. Malik brought in his mission folder and set it on the front table, where anyone could flip through it. He began showing videos his dad had sent from Houston, training clips, simulations, even a short tour of the spacecraft's cockpit. They didn't sit in rows in the club. They sat in circles. They asked questions not because they were told to, but because they wanted to know. What does a rocket sound like from the inside? How do you eat without gravity? Could a kid really go to space one day? One afternoon, Jonah, a 6th grader with a stutter and an encyclopedic knowledge of Mars, brought in a homemade rover he'd built from recycled toys. It didn't move much, but it had a flashlight duct taped to the front like a headlamp. Malik spent 20 minutes asking him about the design, listening closely, nodding like a scientist reviewing a prototype. Jonah smiled the whole time. Miss Hendricks mostly stayed to the side now. She guided gently but let them lead. Sometimes, that's the best kind of teaching, stepping back so others can step forward. One afternoon, she approached Malik as the others were packing up. "I think we should apply for a district STEM grant," she said. "We could buy a telescope, materials, maybe even build a model of the Artemis rocket." Malik hesitated. You think they'd give it to us? I think they'd be lucky to, she replied. But I'd like you to help me write it. You can explain the vision better than I ever could. He agreed. They worked on the application over the next week, Malik writing a section on the power of representation in science, quoting from the words his father had spoken during his classroom visit. Space doesn't belong to one kind of person. It belongs to the brave. In his own words, Malik added, sometimes a kid just needs to see themselves in the stars to believe they belong there too. They submitted the grant on a Thursday. The following Monday, a letter arrived confirming approval. The school would receive a budget for materials, a telescope, and additional resources for STEM enrichment. Malik read the letter twice, then once more aloud to his parents. His father smiled. You're not just exploring space, he said. You're changing the story. A few weeks later, the school newsletter featured a small photo of the club standing around a cardboard model of the moon's surface. Malik stood at the center, holding a pointer toward a cluster of tiny paper craters. The caption read, Exploring New Worlds. Roosevelt's cosmic explorers dream big. The attention didn't stop there. A local reporter reached out to Ms. Hendricks for an interview, and before long, the district STEM coordinator visited the school to observe a meeting. She watched as Malik and Liam demonstrated how astronauts use tethers during spacewalks using string and toy figurines. The coordinator pulled Malik aside afterward. We're launching a youth mentorship initiative. Would you be interested in being a junior ambassador? Malik stared at her, stunned. You mean, like teaching other kids? Yes, she said, and showing them what's possible. That night, Malik sat on his roof with his father, wrapped in jackets, hot chocolate warming their hands. You remember when you thought no one would believe you? Andre asked. Malik nodded. Now they're asking you to lead. He didn't answer. He just looked up at the sky. Clearer now, the stars more visible than ever. It wasn't that they had changed. It was him. He had stepped into something. He had filled the silence. His voice had reached the stars, not by volume, but by truth. Spring came quietly to Boulder, as if unsure whether it was welcome. The snowmelt lingered at the edges of sidewalks, and the trees stretched toward the sun with hesitant buds. But something more than weather had begun to thaw at Roosevelt Elementary. There was a new kind of energy moving through its halls, an unspoken momentum born from the quiet determination of a 10-year-old boy who had once been dismissed for daring to tell the truth. Malik Johnson walked those halls differently now, not with arrogance and not with ease either, but with a grounded steadiness, like someone who had already survived something harder than the average school day. There were still days he felt the echoes of that moment, when his truth had been doubted in front of his peers, when laughter had cut sharper than silence. But those days didn't own him anymore. They had simply become part of the scaffolding of who he was becoming. The Cosmic Explorers Club had grown beyond anything Malik expected. What began as a gathering of a few curious students had become a fixture of the school, drawing interest not only from peers, but parents, educators, even district officials. There was talk now of expanding it to other grades. Younger students peeked into the science room during club meetings with wide eyes and questions written all over their faces. Some stayed after school just to watch. Malik didn't think of himself as a leader, not in the way some kids did, with loud voices or natural charisma. But leadership, he was learning, wasn't always about being the loudest. Sometimes it was about being the one who kept showing up, who asked better questions, who noticed the kids sitting alone and said, "Want to build a rocket together?" The club's latest project was their most ambitious yet, planning Roosevelt's first ever stargazing night, a school-wide event designed and hosted entirely by the Cosmic Explorers. The idea had been Malik's, sparked during a late-night conversation with his father beneath the sharp clarity of a cold sky. We could teach people how to look up, Malik had said, not just stare, but really look. He didn't know, at the time, how far the idea would travel. Within days, they had a committee, a date, a flyer. Parents volunteered hot chocolate stations and brought blankets. One father donated a portable projector for an indoor planetarium in case the weather turned. Miss Hendricks coordinated with the local university's astronomy club, who agreed to bring two high-powered telescopes. On the day of the event, the backfield of Roosevelt transformed. Folding tables held handouts and constellation guides. Student-built displays lined the perimeter, models of Mars rovers, a diagram of the solar system, and a life-size cardboard cutout of the Artemis I launch vehicle. Kids in gloves and hats raced across the grass with flashlights like miniature comets. Parents huddled in groups, sipping warm drinks and pointing to stars their children were naming for them. Malik moved through it all with quiet purpose, checking each station, answering questions, helping adjust telescope settings when one tilted too far or fogged in the cold. He wasn't performing. He was present. Near one telescope, a second grader named Alina tugged on his sleeve. "Is that one Jupiter?" Malik leaned down. "Almost. That's Saturn. See the little rings?" She gasped. "It looks like a glow stick." He smiled. "Pretty cool, huh?" "I want to be an astronaut too," she said. "But my brother says only boys can go." Malik's face didn't change, but his voice carried steel. "Your brother's wrong." Alina grinned. "Good." A few feet away, Liam helped explain how craters formed on the moon. He used a tray of flour and small pebbles to demonstrate impact patterns. No one called him a bully now. He wasn't trying to erase what he had done before, but something had shifted in him too. And Malik, who had once feared even sharing a table with him, now worked beside him with ease. Miss Hendricks stood at the edge of the field, arms folded against the chill, watching the scene unfold. Her expression was hard to read, but her eyes followed Malik's every step, not with scrutiny, with something closer to wonder. At one point in the evening, she stepped up to the microphone placed on the makeshift stage. "I want to thank you all for coming," she began. "Tonight is about more than stargazing. It's about how we choose to see. A few months ago, I failed to see one of my students clearly. I let assumptions speak louder than truth. But that same student kept showing up, kept speaking, and helped us build something beautiful. I hope we all learn from that. I know I have." The crowd turned toward Malik. He didn't say anything, but his chest rose and fell with the weight of the moment. That night, after the crowd had thinned and the stars had begun to pulse deeper into the sky, Malik sat on a blanket between his parents, a thermos of cocoa warming his hands. "I still remember," he said quietly, "the day I almost didn't finish the presentation." His father looked at him. "But you did." "I almost didn't," Malik repeated. "I thought maybe it didn't matter. Maybe no one would ever believe me." Danielle reached for his hand. "And now?" Malik looked up. Now the stars didn't feel distant anymore. They didn't shimmer like unreachable things. They burned like something calling to him, steady and waiting. "I think they do," he said. "Believe me." His father wrapped an arm around him. "And when they forget again, and they will, you remind them." Malik nodded. He didn't need anyone else to lift him anymore. He knew where the gravity came from now. In the following weeks, the district featured the Cosmic Explorers in a Spotlight newsletter. Malik was invited to speak at a student STEM summit, where he shared how the club was founded not out of ambition, but out of necessity. His words, delivered softly, but with quiet precision, reached more than just the students in the room. They reached teachers, administrators, policymakers. He didn't talk about being doubted. He didn't talk about the laughter, not directly. But he did say this: "Sometimes a voice gets ignored, not because it's wrong, but because it comes from the place they don't expect truth to live. But we speak anyway. Because silence doesn't protect dreams. It buries them." The audience rose in a slow, unanimous standing ovation, not because he was the loudest, but because he had become impossible to ignore. At school, Ms. Hendricks began letting him review upcoming lesson plans for their astronomy unit. He didn't correct her with superiority, only with precision. When she mistakenly labeled Neptune's position in an orbital sequence, he gently offered an update, and she nodded with gratitude. One afternoon, she handed him a thick envelope. "It's from the State STEM Council," she said. "You've been nominated for the Young Scientific Visionary Award. They'd like you to speak at the Capitol." Malik didn't open it right away. He looked out the classroom window, past the trees, past the rooftops, into the sky that had once felt so far from him. When he got home, he added a new page to his mission journal. Mission log MJ04, status, liftoff coordinates, expanding trajectory, unbound primary PT. Objective, inspire, include, illuminate, and under it, he wrote a sentence that had become his compass. There is no such thing as a voice too small for the stars. The sky hadn't changed, but he had, and that was more than enough to begin. There are stories we hear, and there are stories we carry. Malik Johnson's story is the kind we carry, not because of the grandeur of rockets or the awe of zero gravity, but because of what it reveals about truth, identity, and what it means to take up space in a world that sometimes doesn't make room for you. From the moment Malik stood beneath the flat, unfamiliar skies of Boulder, Colorado, his journey wasn't simply about adapting to a new school or a new city. It was a test of something far deeper, the resilience of belief in the face of denial, the courage to speak truth even when silence is safer, the choice to keep reaching for the stars when the world says you don't belong in orbit. Malik's family didn't come from wealth or privilege. His strength came from something quieter but more enduring: legacy. His father, Andre Johnson, wasn't just an astronaut in training. He was a man building a dream step by step, breath by breath, in a system not built to include him. His mother, Danielle, was not just a protector, but a force, someone who didn't demand space for her son, but carved it out with her presence. Malik inherited their grit, their clarity, their refusal to shrink in the face of doubt. And yet, when his moment came, when he stood in front of his fifth grade class to tell them that his father was preparing to return humans to the moon, his truth was met not with wonder, but with laughter. Let that sink in. A 10-year-old boy armed with facts, photographs, schematics, and a heart full of pride was publicly shut down by an adult whose role was to nurture, not diminish. That moment, brutal in its clarity, became the turning point. Hendricks didn't just question the content of his presentation, she questioned Malik's reality. She declared, in front of his peers, that the truth was too big for someone like him to own. But Malik didn't disappear. Yes, he folded inwards for a time. He stopped raising his hand. He sat alone. He let his stars fade into the corners of his backpack. But his silence wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. It was the stillness before ignition. And when his parents found out what had happened, they didn't respond with noise. They responded with precision, with proof, with the power of showing up, not in anger, but in unwavering presence. Andre walked into that school with his credentials, his photos, his mission, history, not to boast, but to reclaim his son's truth. What followed was not just a public apology, it was a public reckoning, a moment that forced an entire classroom, and more importantly, its teacher, to confront the limits of their imagination and who they thought was allowed to live within it. But the most profound part of Malik's journey came after the apology, because he didn't stop at being vindicated. He didn't settle for having his truth acknowledged. He used it as a launch pad. He helped build something bigger, a community, a club, a space, both literal and metaphorical, where other students could ask questions, dream beyond what they could see, and believe that science, exploration, and leadership weren't reserved for the few. He didn't just rebuild his own sense of belonging, he expanded it to include others. He welcomed Liam, the very boy who had once called him a liar, into the Cosmic Explorers Club. He mentored Jonah, a shy sixth grader with a love for Mars rovers. He lifted the voices of his peers not by stepping aside, but by standing beside them. Through this, Malik became more than a student, more than a kid with a brilliant father. He became a bridge, a leader, a reminder that representation isn't just about who we see in textbooks, but who we listen to in the back row of a classroom. His journey took him from silence to speech, from invisibility to influence. He didn't chase recognition, but it found him anyway, because truth, when spoken with clarity and purpose, echoes. It reaches the places where doubt once lived. It changes people. When the Cosmic Explorers hosted their first stargazing night, Malik didn't stand in the spotlight. He walked among the students. He adjusted telescope lenses. He answered questions with patience and precision. He showed a second grader Saturn's rings and told her, without hesitation, that she could be an astronaut too. The boy who had once been told he was making it up was now shaping curriculum, advising teachers, mentoring peers, and being invited to speak at regional STEM summits. He didn't get there by demanding space. He earned it by refusing to give up on the truth he knew was his, and maybe most importantly, he forgave. Not in the sense of forgetting, but in the way of refusing to let someone else's failure define his path. He worked beside Ms. Hendricks, helped her build new lesson plans, corrected her gently when needed, and allowed her the space to grow. Because true leadership isn't about holding power over others, it's about holding a mirror to what's possible. So what do we learn from Malik? We learn that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I will try again tomorrow." We learn that truth is not determined by how many people believe it, but by how faithfully we carry it. We learn that being doubted is not the end of your story. It's often the moment just before your voice becomes impossible to ignore. And we learn that the most powerful kind of justice doesn't come from punishment, but from change, collaboration, and the courage to build something new from the rubble of dismissal. Malik's journey reminds us that no child should have to prove the possibility of their dreams just because of the color of their skin, or the sound of their name, or the neighborhood they moved into. But when they do, when they rise to that challenge, they don't just reclaim their dignity, they light the path for others. So how do we apply this story to our lives? Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a student, or someone who simply walks through this world trying to do good, this story asks you to look inward. Ask yourself, have I ever dismissed someone because their truth didn't align with my assumptions? Have I ever stayed silent when someone else's voice was being erased? Have I created space for others to speak, or simply filled it with my own certainty? And perhaps most importantly, what do I do now that I know better? Malik's story is an invitation to listen more deeply, to question our assumptions, to believe not just in potential, but in the right of every child to dream without ridicule, and to create spaces where the next Malik doesn't have to stand alone at the front of a classroom to defend the truth. We live in a time where division comes easily, where skepticism hardens into cynicism, and where voices, especially young, bold, hopeful voices, are often drowned out. But stories like Malik's remind us that change doesn't require a title or a microphone. It starts with the courage to speak, to believe, to show up. So wherever you are in life, if you've been silenced, or if you've been the one who looked away, let this be a moment of turning, a moment to recommit to your truth, to justice, to building something bigger than yourself. Because the stars are still waiting, and they do not care where you came from. They care only that you keep looking up. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Malik, or his parents, or the teacher learning to be better, then please support this journey. Subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their voice matters, that their truth is enough. Your support keeps stories like this alive. It gives us the power to keep telling them, to keep reaching into the silence and pulling out the stars. So subscribe, stay with us, and together, let's keep lifting each other towards something greater. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice to remind the world how to listen.